Welcome back to Wordsmiths and a Wolfhound, Happiness Through the Arts and Self-Sufficiency. Tonight we are here to talk about Ayn Rand's, Ayn Rand's what book? Atlas Shrugged. Short memory here. Before we jump into it, I wanted to mention a couple things that we've had going. We did just put out, as Gabriel's Horn, our third annual anthology of new poetry in traditional forms, and this year's theme was love, startled by love. So this book features a poet named Jennifer Ann F. Messing, and she is a rather prolific poet with several books to her name, in addition to, I believe, hundreds, perhaps thousands of poems and essays published elsewhere. Besides that, I have just put out my book, Tales of Things Beyond Our World, Stories of the Supernatural, and it is so hot off the presses, I don't even have my own copies yet. So that's something to look for. And today we are going to talk about Atlas Shrugged. If anyone is familiar with Ein Rand, I always want to say Ayn Rand, but apparently it is pronounced Ein. This is not to be quibbled with little tome of a mere 1,200 pages. So, Chris, can you give us a little background on who Ayn Rand is and on the book Atlas Shrugged? Or do you want to tell us what wine we're drinking first?
I think when it comes to Ayn Rand, we have to start with the wine. So here we have a wonderful bottle of a Piatelli Cabernet Sauvignon from Mendoza, Argentina. This family is actually from Tuscany originally, and they transferred to the Mendoza region. And so we have this beautiful bottle that we have here, and we shall have a toast to the third implied W of Wordsmiths and a Wolfhound, which is the wine.
Very nice.
Indeed.
Chose well.
Well, and it's a weighty wine for a weighty book. And we shall not wait any longer in moving forward with the discussion. Yes. So Ayn Rand, this is her last novel that she wrote. It took her almost 12 years to write and kind of bookends her career. One could say that this book actually defines her career, both from the standpoint of speaking to her objectivist philosophy and then also reconciling the whole arc of her life, dating from Leninist Russia going forward, speaking about why such socialist, communist, and Marxist foundations to society are so very wrong, which started with her book We the Living in about 1921. She wrote actually as a late teenager. She had lived in Leninist Russia and experienced it firsthand in the early part of the 20th century, and wanted to write this book much shorter than Atlas Shrugged, as a warning to those, similar to how Orwell wrote 1984 as a warning and how society should go, in contrast to some who might treat it as a manual, which is not correct.
Not what he intended. So what is the basic theme of Atlas Shrugged? And keeping in mind, Ayn Rand was, what, in her early 20s when she started this book?
This particular book she started later in her career. This was her last novel. But the ideas of objectivist philosophy had kind of occurred to her quite, a bit throughout her life. The theme of Atlas Shrugged, basically, this is according to Ayn Rand, is the role of the mind in man's existence. It is the mind, the story shows, that is the root of all human knowledge and values, and its absence is the root of evil. So for Rand, reason is needed not just by a theoretical scientist or an engineer in their lab, but by all of us at all times. All of the novel's heroes are thinkers. They demonstrate an ongoing commitment to understanding their work, themselves, and the world around them. They choose their goals and values by a process of thought, never putting their desires above the facts. The villains, on the other hand, are those who defy reason and evade facts, acting on what's left, which are really only their feelings. As a result, they're in constant conflict with reality and achieve nothing. This is what leads one of the novel's heroes, actually, to the conclusion that thinking is the basic virtue that life requires, and that the anti-mind is anti-life.
And why was this book so controversial? It seems that a lot of the ideas in it really shouldn't be.
And there are a number of reasons why it was controversial. One of them was that it wrestled with the topic of good and evil. The heroes of Atlas Shrugged are condemned for their selfishness by the outside world, while the villains tout their selflessness and the moral duty to sacrifice. But readers come to see that the interests of the rational characters don't consist of robbery, exploitation, crass materialism, or cold-heartedness, which is what many people consider capitalists to be. Rather, the hero's interests consist in highly admirable values and virtues, unflinching honesty, independent judgment, personal achievement. In their dealings with others, they seek to gain by trade, with the result being a profound benevolence towards other such self-interested characters. Self-sacrifice, however, in contrast, is shown to lead to just the sort of cruelty, exploitation, and injustice traditionally associated with selfishness. What is selfishness in Ayn Rand's philosophy? It means that you follow reason, not whims or faith. You work hard to achieve a life of purpose and productivity. You earn genuine self-esteem as a function of that. You pursue your own happiness as your highest moral aim, in relation to your position to God as well. And you prosper by treating others as individuals, trading value for value, not trading on feelings, not trading on things that are vacuous or value-free, but trading value for value.
So you mentioned happiness, and that sort of brought my mind to several philosophies which have said that being happy is actually a moral requirement, and that goes right up to today's Dennis Prager, who uses the slogan happiness. What is his slogan? Happiness is a moral obligation, I believe. Mm-hmm. And that's because if you are miserable, you're spreading misery to other people, and there's no virtue in making other people miserable. Right, so this kind of goes to what Ayn Rand is saying, that people strive to be happy, but in striving for their own happiness, they really are also giving happiness to others. So one of the famous phrases from this book is, "Who is John Galt?" So tell us about John Galt.
To the extent, without giving away the book, I shall. So, who is John Galt? There are many legends, not just in society, but in this book. So, which, if any, of these legends are true? Is John Galt the man who discovered the Fountain of Youth? The man who discovered Atlantis? The Lost City? A modern Prometheus? Does he even exist in this book, or in real life? And why, if no one knows the answer, does the entire world know his name? John Galt is a protagonist of this book, but you might say a protagonist that at times might appear to be ethereal or virtual, in contrast to being real. So as you work your way through the book, the idea of who is John Galt is a vexation to those who are ostensibly selfless, and he is a goal. He is the epitome of society to those who are actually selfish, but in this regard we know objectively are taking care of themselves and the world.
How does Atlas Shrugged address the debate between good and evil?
So Atlas Shrugged actually challenges many traditional ideas or notions about good and evil. For example, that sex is a low or animal desire, that money is the root of evil, that man is sinful by nature. One of the most prominent is the notion that selfishness is evil and self-sacrifice is good. The heroes of Atlas Shrugged are condemned to their selfishness, while the villains tout their selflessness and their moral duty to sacrifice. But the basic idea here that we see is that, for example, in the contrast between love and sex, the idea that sex is a fulfillment of love, of people who are virtuous by virtue of trading value for value. They are seeking their highest position in life as a function of their relationship to each other and their relationship with God. Whereas people who are ostensibly selfless are seeking a much lower idea of what it means to be joyful in society. They're kind of short-circuiting the idea to joy and going for things that are far more base. And so this idea of good versus evil is the realization that good takes you to objectively higher virtue, whereas evil takes you to the lowest common denominator.
There is one other thing that's particularly interesting in this book, and that is how Ayn Rand treats business. And I believe she lived in a time where business, capitalism, weren't necessarily highly valued, either by the czars or by the Leninists who came in. So how does she address questions of business?
She sees business as inherently noble, actually, and businessmen as well. So the main protagonist of this book, Dagny Tagert, is actually a head of a transcontinental railroad, while her brother is essentially a leech on society, James Tagert. And then you have Henry Reardon, who is a steel magnate and produces steel on his own terms, not those of the country who seek to dictate what and how he should spend his time, money, and materials. And so the basic idea, these are people who deeply love and excel at their work. It's a devotion that requires a solemn commitment to virtue, to thought, integrity, courage, responsibility, and tenacity, because this society is pushing down hard on business and essentially taking their profit, not just through taxes, but actually seizing the rightful benefits of their own work. So many of the novel's villains are also businessmen. The basic difference is that they betray the actual nature of business. For them, business isn't a realm in which to use their mind to create value. Instead, it is a means to appropriate value produced by others. So James Tagert, as I mentioned, lives off his sister Dagny's accomplishments, and the character of Orrin Boyle gets rich from handouts and government favors, constantly seeking to sop to the government and enabling them for taking over society. So for the first time that we've seen in many books in the pages of Atlas Shrugged, those who pursue business rationally receive profound moral recognition, while those who enter the realm to expropriate value receive, justly, condemnation.
Another theme in this book is the contrast of reason versus freedom. To me, those two seem like they should go together, To me, reason, freedom, they're the same thing, or, two parts of the same thing. So why does she contrast them, conflate them? What does it mean to say reason versus freedom?
And indeed, in this book, reason and freedom are corollaries. As Ayn Rand holds, are faith and force. And, Atlas Shrugged showcases essentially both relationships. The heroes are unwavering thinkers. Freedom to think, to venture into the new and unknown, to earn, to trade, to succeed and fail and pursue their own individual happiness is essentially a goal unto itself. The villains, by contrast, reject the absolutism of reason. They want a world ruled by their feelings, in which wishing makes it so. James Tagert, for instance, the brother of Dagny, wants to be the head of a railroad without any need for effort. No amount of thinking can bring such a world about. He must attempt to then bring it about by force, which is exactly what government slips into when they can't declare that these capitalists, that these virtuous owners of businesses can, produce according to what the state wants. They do mandate by force, even taking these companies away from them. So The basic idea is anyone who resorts to the formula, "It's so because I say so," will have to reach for a gun sooner or later. This is what we see with government. When they're delegitimized, they reach for force as their only ostensible virtue that they enforce by virtue of might rather than right.
Another one of the controversies in Atlas Shrugged is this relationship between Dagny Tagert and Henry Reardon, because Henry Reardon is married when they meet, when they start seeing each other. How does Ayn Rand treat love and sex in this relationship in this book?
So traditionally, love is regarded as spiritual and selfless. Sex, on the other hand, is regarded as low and animalistic, with some claiming we should therefore renounce it in the name of higher values, and others saying there are no higher values, and so we should just indulge in it indiscriminately. So Atlas Shrugged challenges this entire perspective. Love is shown as an inherently selfish emotion. Love is the expression of one's values, says one of the novel's heroes, the greatest reward you can earn for the moral qualities you have achieved in your character and person, the emotional price paid by one man for the joy he receives from the virtues of another. To love is to value, and the proper expression of romantic valuing is sex. Sex is not an animalistic desire, but a union of the spiritual and material, the mind and the body. For the novel's heroes, it is a celebration of one's partner, oneself, and all of existence. And in contrast, Henry Reardon's relationship with his wife was essentially the exact opposite. She was essentially, to say it, money grubbing for her lifestyle without any real purpose in her life. Henry Reardon was not in a happy relationship with her. He could see that even he was being manipulated by her, and he spent essentially all of his time outside the house as a function of that. Whereas with his relationship with Dagny, here was someone who they were in a relationship that mutually valued one another, and that was what an important difference is. In Ayn Rand's objectivist philosophy, she wrote a number of nonfiction books. One of them was Voice of Reason, Essays on Objectivist Thought. She clarified a bit further as well, saying, sex is a physical capacity, but its exercise is determined by man's mind, by his choice of values, held consciously or unconsciously. To a rational man, sex is an expression of self-esteem, a celebration of himself and of existence. To the man who lacks self-esteem, sex is an attempt to fake it, to acquire its momentary illusion. So the idea, again, as we've read in other books, such as The Evidentiary Power of Beauty by Father Thomas Dubay, does the activity in your life take you closer to God, or does it take you farther away? And in a relationship that you have between two people, does it draw you closer together in sacrament with God and to each other, or does it take you away from that? Ayn Rand was clear what the difference was in this case.
So we've covered objectivity, and how does she treat Christianity? I think that perhaps she was not a Christian, but she touches on that subject.
The topic of Ayn Rand's faith has been one that's been argued quite extensively. However, it's very clear that her objectives of virtue and selfishness in terms of owning your destiny take us much closer to the concept of what God has in mind for each of us. We are created in His image. We are blessing Him by virtue of what we do in our lives. And so Ayn Rand says what we should be doing is getting closer to that objectivist reality, which takes us closer to that universal existence that God is. So we see that there, while Ayn Rand may not have been a faithful person per se, she was in fact being very faithful to what God created in her and creates in each one of us. There is a philosophy called Christian hedonism, which essentially also speaks to this idea of Ayn Rand's, selfishness. And the idea here is that we literally take delight in joy of knowing God. and to actually, our fear of him is to know that we are in relationship with him, that he is superior, but we are created in his image, and we seek to follow him to get closer to his heart. C.S. Lewis commented on this in, saying God had created humanity to enjoy to the fullest. When infinite joy is offered us, we are like an ignorant child who wants to go on making mud pies in the slums because he cannot imagine what is meant by the offer of a holiday at the sea. We are far too easily pleased. This is the difference. When you're being ostensibly selfless, but in reality you are not following any type of morality, you are not seeing yourself high enough in even God's eyes, and you short-circuit your path to seeking joy by looking for those things that are base. Whereas if we move beyond the mud pies and move to this infinite joy of this relationship with God, we will attain all that comes with that in terms of our true potential.
So the last question before we get into what's coming next is, what are the lessons for today? I mean, this is a book written, 80 to 100 years ago, and yet it holds powerful lessons for today's readers. I think everyone should read this book. So what should someone today learn from this book?
It's an excellent question, and as we see, exhibits in the Smithsonian today that essentially go against everything that we've heard so far in this interview. The lessons that Ayn Rand teaches us really are quite clear. We follow reason, not whims or faith. We work hard to achieve a life of purpose and productiveness. We earn genuine self-esteem as a function of knowing that we are on track with following where our potential truly lies, which takes us right towards God. We pursue our own happiness as its highest moral aim, which is literally built into our founding documents in this country. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And the idea actually taken from the original Scottish Enlightenment is this was life, liberty, and property, where happiness is through property. This is, again, an objectivist ideal. And that also we prosper by treating others as individuals, trading value for value. This also gets to the economist F.A. Hayek's idea of settling prices and settling economic value as a function of independent people all interacting with one another, maximizing the knowledge that they have over what it is they're trading. You get the best price, you get the best products, you get the best results in all of society when you do this. When you attempt to control what's going on by virtue of settling prices at the state level, settling products at the state level, you're only going to get, again, that short-circuiting, that idea of getting to the base level of what society is all about, not its true potential. And as we've seen with socialism, communism, and Marxism, what you also get, in addition to moral bankruptcy, are the deaths, literally, in the 20th century alone, of 100 million people. There's the force of the gun. If the government cannot, bring you to the idea of appreciating what they stand for, then they will simply kill you in order to get beyond it and maximize the power of the state.
So the Wolfhound portion of the program decided she needed to go out in the middle of the program. As we noted, if I can pick up this book, I did drop the glasses and the pen. This is not light reading, and I believe you said she can go on for pages and pages describing, any one tiny little thing. So for those who have hopefully been inspired to read some Ayn Rand, where would you suggest they start? Is there maybe something a little lighter and easier than 1,200 pages?
I would definitely recommend starting with We the Living. It's a much shorter book, and it gets straight to the point. And if you picked up We the Living from Ayn Rand, and you also picked up F.A. Hayek's Road to Serfdom, which is also an accessible set of his work, unlike a lot of his other more in-depth work, you will get a straightforward introduction to what it means to be virtuous in society, both economically as well as from the standpoint of culture and what you should be doing in a day-to-day life in relation to your own life, your relationship to your spouse or significant other, and your relationship to God. And so both of those books, I think, are a very good introduction. But you will be called forth, and you will want to know who John Galt is, and you will want to read this book.
I wish that I had just all the time in the world to read this book. I really would like to. I would like to read many of her other books. So some of the things we have coming up are, this is a funny story. You've got to love spell check. I'm sure everyone out there has a spell check story. And one of mine is that spell check loves to correct my last name. It is Vosika. And so when I go to Amazon and I put in Startled by Love, Vosika, it says, "Do you mean Startled by Love, vodka?" To which I say, no, I don't. However, if spell check is going to turn your last name into vodka, you may as well go with it. And so we are looking at getting some Johnny Love vodka and offering a package deal. Book of Poetry on Love with Johnny Love vodka by someone whose last name corrects to vodka. So what's not to love, right? And so coming up for some of our next videos, we are going to have, I'm working on putting together a video on companion gardening, and that is the idea that some plants grow better next to certain plants and they don't fare as well by other plants. So amazingly, this is a very controversial idea among gardeners. I admit I don't know how controversial, but there are people who say it's all baloney. There are others who say there's no scientific evidence, but it does seem to work well for them, so they keep doing it. And my feeling is, what can it hurt? You have to put the plant somewhere, right? So if you've got loads of people saying this and this do better next to each other, why not? I have nowhere else to start. And I'm thinking for our next interview about books, we will probably talk about the great Margaret J Anderson. And you, of course, want to ask me,
what do I want to ask you?
So we don't improv well unless it involves trombones. Or maybe piano. Margaret J. Anderson is actually a writer, a very prolific writer, and I first knew of her in the 1970s when I was quite young. I'd like to, hide my age and say, oh, I wasn't even born yet. I don't know what you're talking about. But she had a fantastic book called In the Keep of Time, which really inspired a lot of my own writing. And it's a children's book, but it's a fantastic story, and it really has some deeper lessons in it, even though it's much lighter reading than Ein Rand. But there are all sorts of ways to tell stories and, give some lessons. So I had the great fortune in 2019 in the summer of going out to Oregon and meeting her. And a friend and I met her and her daughter, and she invited us to lunch and dinner at their house. And she gave me quite a selection of her books, and I found out that she wrote way more than the one children's novel I knew. She actually wrote nonfiction on historical figures and a lot of books on beetles and bugs. Her husband was an entomologist, but she wrote other fiction. She wrote a story based on her own experience as a Scottish child during World War II. So some really fascinating books that she wrote, and that's what is coming up next.
Well, that sounds awesome. I do have to take some exception with the point you made about companion gardening, that some people consider it baloney. Something tells me if it's all baloney in your garden, you're doing it wrong. And so, on that note, I think we'll have another sip of wine on Wordsmiths and a Wolfhound, who's at the back door desiring to come in. Yep. And many thanks to the Ayn Rand website, who very much helped prepare a lot of the remarks that I had on her book. It's a very difficult set of material to get through, and economically or efficiently in time. And so I very much appreciate that website for being able to help me organize my own thoughts as well. So, cheers to the Piatelli Cabernet, and to next time on Wordsmiths and a Wolfhound.
Okay.